So just for 5 minutes, I want to set the context because I'm sure you're all thinking, why, why wildcats? Why the Southwest? Kath will be able to answer a lot of those questions, I think, during her presentation. But just to give some background, really, and I'm afraid this bit is somewhat depressing just to start with, in that we are a country that has really impoverished biodiversity. Just since 1500, 151 species have become extinct in the United Kingdom. Um, and some of those at the United Kingdom level, but we are seeing localized extinction, so loss from the southwest or loss from a particular county. So despite all of our best efforts, there are things just outside of our control that are meaning that we will witness future extinctions. Just you may have heard a recent State of Nature report that was published, and out of all of the species which were studied there was a really troubling 1 in 6 or 16% were at risk of extinction. So we have real threats that our wildlife is facing. And even just recently, we've seen the last breeding ring ousel on Dartmoor. So as a breeding species, they're now lost from the county. And if you just go back, just a handful of years, especially in ecological terms, we've seen things like golden plover, nightingale. They're no longer breeding species in our county. How do we reverse that, or how do we ensure that that doesn't happen? Well, a huge amount of our effort, the vast majority of DWT's effort and all of our partners is firstly about ensuring that we've got the right amount of habitat in really thriving condition that can support these threatened species. If you provide space, those species will survive, and they'll in many cases have a really bright future. And you can see that with some of our really pioneering work that we've done around culm grasslands, which have helped provide the perfect conditions for marsh fertility, and they've been able to make a comeback. Or in our marine world, where through our campaigning work, we've stopped bottom trawling or enabled bottom trawling to be stopped in Lyme Bay. And we've seen all of these wonderful rare and scarce reef species that have recovered. However, there are some species that are super specialized. They have a highly specialized niche in our environments, and we need to do really targeted work to support their recovery. Some of those include, like, for example, our woodland fritillaries, so high brown fritillary or pearl-bordered fritillary. There, we're dedicating really specialist work to help their species populations to recover. But there are others, the populations are just so fragile that we need to take direct action. And that might mean that we are translocating species. We might be reinforcing populations. Let's say a population's genetic diversity got so low that they really weren't that resilient. Bringing new species in to bolster that is really important. So we also then think about, well, reintroductions. So, for example, a species may have been lost from the county, still present elsewhere in the UK, and is it possible for us to return these back to the county because they might not be able to make their own way here? It might be because of road networks or other features, which means that it's effectively impenetrable to get back to this area. So we have done some key translocation work. We've looked at translocating narrow-headed ant. We've got one population of narrow-headed ant in England, and we've worked closely with BugLife to help translocate that species. We've done the same with southern blue damselflies, both ultra-rare species where they're just not going to be able to find their way into the county naturally. So you need to bolster them. So the question then is, well, where do wildcats fit in? And I want to be really candid, I suppose, to start off with that. I first started having conversations in Devon Wildlife Trust and the wider conservation sector probably 10 years ago or so. And at that point in time, I expect I had really similar reactions to many of you listening to me now. I had absolutely no experience of wildcats, and what's more, I didn't know anyone that actually did either. They were an elusive species that I assumed were their natural state was somewhere in the Cairngorms in the Highlands of Scotland. So they're completely unknown to me. They're out of sight and out of mind. But the more we've explored this, and with a whole range of other organisations, we've recognised just what the perilous state wildcats are in the UK, and they are at the verge of extinction. But what's more, England and Wales has a really important role to play in their future. So some extremely respected scientific organisations and bodies have highlighted the fact that the Southwest, as amongst other areas, could play a role in the future of wildcats. So it's really our job then to explore, is this feasible? And that's where Kath comes in, and Kath's skills. That I don't think we would be the organisation we are if someone identified the Southwest as a place where wildcats could potentially be reintroduced, and that we should be exploring feasibility. That if we then just ignored that, but reintroduction is tough. It's really hard. The feasibility phases of these programs, you need to leave no stone unturned. And just as much about the welfare of the animals themselves, but the feasibility of us living alongside them, if there are economic impacts to other species. So this is the start of the process. This isn't giving it a green light. It's about finding out a lot more. And this is the first step in that, in gathering as much information as we have, and then being able to share that, and then progressing, through that scientific, social feasibility elements before future decisions might be made. So I'm going to hand on now to Kath, and she'll provide about 45 minutes presentation, just introducing the wildcats. So over to you, Kath.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, and hello everybody. I'm very, very excited to be here to sort of share, where we are with the project, and yeah, and just hopefully sort of give people some information about what we're doing, and hopefully sort of making people realise what a fantastic species this is. Right, I'm just sharing my screen at the moment. I can't multitask, I can't talk and share at the same time. And right, I'm gonna do that. Right, is that okay, Pete? Can you see that?
Yes, all good.
Brilliant, good. Okay, so yes, talking about wildcats. Now, my background is actually birding. I've come from the RSPB, and I've spent 25 years working on species recovery with birds. So yeah, birds and cats, you might not think it goes together. There's a lot of overlaps, and where you're doing species recovery, which is what I've been working on, actually, it's the same principles. So yeah, hopefully you'll see that as I'm walking along. But yeah, as I say, come from a very birdie background, really love birds, and that's been my career. But I've also loved mammals, and when I saw this job advertised, I just felt that was the job for me. How exciting to work on, investigating whether cats could become part of the Devon countryside again. So title, because a lot of people might think about cats, and there's a lot of negativity about cats. But I'm hoping that through talking today, we might start to dispel some of the myths, and maybe give you a really good understanding of what a wildcat is, and and what it's not. So anyway, so hopefully you're thinking, maybe not, maybe you're thinking sort of, cats in the environment's not a good idea. Let's see where we go. Let's go on a journey together, and see where we get to. So basically, this is, as Pete says, this is a feasibility project. This doesn't mean that we are definitely going to be, releasing cats, wildcats into Devon, but it's a feasibility, and it's a really important piece of work. So it's 18 months. So I've been in post 7 months now, and we've been doing a lot of work getting to understand the species, and sort of making links with all sorts of different people. It's a partnership project, and the partners are on there: Forestry England, Derek Gow Consultancy, and ourselves, Devon Wildlife Trust. And we've also been funded by some fantastic people. Funding for feasibilities is not always easy, so we're really grateful to get these people, these funders supporting us, because without a feasibility, we really can't take this project forward. So, really important. Oops, sorry. So what is a wildcat? So some of you might be thinking about, know them as Scottish wildcat. And to be honest, that's probably what, I'd been thinking. And I was lucky enough to see wildcat in the wild up in Scotland over 25 years ago. And it was fantastic, really exciting to see them. So they are, they're bigger than a domestic cat, but you can see from this picture that they do look quite, like a sort of a chunky tabby cat. They can be up to 25% bigger. They've got longer legs, definitely, though you don't always see this because they're sort of often crouching. But something that's really distinctive is this big, thick tail, and with sort of a black tip to it. And with a domestic cat, you get a sort of taper to the end of their tail, which you just don't get. The wildcat got a real blunt sort of tip to its tail. And that's if you're lucky enough to see one. And basically, they're a European wildcat, so they've got a European distribution, and get them all the way to Turkey, and sort of around the Mediterranean and sort of into Central and Eastern Europe. So they've got quite a wide distribution, and that distribution did used to include England and Wales. But unfortunately, that's no longer the case. Right. So this is a little illustration to sort of illustrate what a wildcat isn't. So this is a domestic cat. So a wildcat is, a distinct species. So European wildcat is a distinct species, and it's a different species from domestic cats. So they're completely different. And domestic cats are actually come from African wildcats and not from European. They're not descended from European wildcats, so they are completely different. So a domestic cat you think of as being, domesticated. They're happy being around people. In fact, they, a lot of the time they want to be near people. You get them in big groups. You get lots of overlapping territories, and as I say, lots of them together. They're being supported by humans who are potentially feeding them. So this is definitely not what I want you to think about when you think about wildcats. This is what I want you to think about with wildcats. It's a cat that is, pretty solitary. They live on their own unless they're breeding, and they are, they don't want to be near people, so they're away from habitation, and they're, out in woodlands. So their scientific name means, woodcat. Which is also their old English name, which is why, if you notice in the title, we talked about woodcat. So basically, a wildcat is very different from domestic cat. I can't stress that enough. They're very, they're not one. They don't like to be near people. They're not you're not able to tame them, and they're out in the sort of wilds, as far as away from people as they can be, really. And they avoid, farms, and they avoid, urban areas. So get that picture in your mind. That is what a wildcat is. And the habitat that they frequent is obviously woodland. Woodland is really important for them, and especially for females, because that's where they're going to have their dens, and that's where they're going to, keep their kittens safe. And it's also good for, foraging. So particularly sort of, broadleaf broadly sort of woodland or mixed woodland with a good sort of, base layer, lots of cover, but also this sort of this sort of habitat with lots of scrub and open areas is really important. So this is really fantastic woodland habitat. So you've got lots of interesting sort of structures, and it's having that structural diversity that's really important. Because if there's good structural diversity, it's usually sort of good prey items as well. So and you might expect a woodcat to be sort of having a den underneath sort of fallen tree, or the sort of the root plate that comes up when a tree falls over. So having this sort of structural diversity is really important. But also open habitats are particularly important. And so this is really fantastic looking wildcat habitat. So you've got areas of woodland, but you've also got this open habitat, which is where you've potentially got lots of prey, and you've also got the fantastic sort of hedge boundaries, which are brilliant for providing cover, but also sort of moving between areas of habitat, foraging habitat, shelter. So hopefully you're starting to see that actually there's some really, in Devon support some of this great wildcat habitat. So it's there's potential lots of habitat for wildcats in Devon. That's what we're finding. What they're feeding on is they're predominantly feeding on small mammals. So, field voles, bank voles, mice, so wood mice, but also rabbits. Rabbits are a really, really key source of food where, where it's available. The wildcats really will focus on rabbits, and obviously it provides quite a good big meaty meal. And I think it's so it's quite okay. Okay, I've just been told again that the microphone's just not working, so I'm just going to try without any mics. I'm really sorry about that. Really apologise if the sound's not working for everyone. That's not great. So I'm hoping that's better. From people. Right. Okay. So I'll just carry on like that, and apologise if it's not been great before. So this is what prey items are for wildcats. Obviously, it is a carnivore, and it is a pure carnivore. It's not going to switch its diet. It doesn't seasonally switch to the eating berries or anything like that. It's very much based on meat, and and having enough prey is really important for wildcats to survive. Okay, so what went wrong for our poor old wildcats? So they used to be very widely distributed throughout sort of England and Wales, and we know from records that there used to be a lot of wildcats in Devon and Cornwall in the southwest. But one of the big problems for them was persecution, unfortunately. So ever since sort of like the mid 1500s, they have been classed as vermin, and there was a bounty on their head. So there was basically a reward for killing these animals. So persecution has had a massive impact on wildcat populations, and is there's potentially some habitat loss. But persecution was the thing that really sort of did for wildcat. They were probably lost from England by about the 1880s, but there was a population that was potentially still remaining on Exmoor into sort of like the 1920s, but it's difficult to prove whether that's accurate or not, whether they were actual wildcats or whether they were sort of feral cats that looked quite wild. But it's nice to think that maybe, you know, the southwest was the last place where wildcats were in England. But yeah, no, so they've been lost by persecution. And as I say, that they, you know, there was this bounty on their head, and it wasn't until 1988 that they became a protected species. But by that time, it was, you know, it was too late for them in England. But luckily, we've still got some wildcats stuff up in Scotland, and as I said, that's where I saw them, you know, about over 25 years ago, and and then I've been going along thinking there's wildcats up in Scotland, and isn't that fantastic? And you know, wonderful. But the news from Scotland is not great, and we know that hybridization with domestic cats is basically meant that the population that's left are pretty much all hybrids. And unfortunately, this has resulted in the IUCN declaring that the Scottish population is functionally extinct, which is which is really, you know, just so sad. So hybridization with domestic cats has been a massive problem, but probably a symptom, or not probably, but it's probably a symptom of the fact that the population in Scotland had become so, you know, fragmented and at so, you know, low numbers, that there actually wasn't, you know, what was happening is the wildcats were struggling to find other wildcats to breed with. And so that's why they then came into contact with feral cats, domestic cats, and we had this issue. So it's a, you know, potentially a big issue that needs to be addressed. So it's really, you know, that's not too sad and gloomy, you know. And our colleagues in Scotland are working really hard to, you know, address the issue and work to try and, you know, reverse this and you know, bring back the Scottish wildcat, and or the Highland tiger as they like to call it. So there's a lot of conservation work that's ongoing, and one of the big things is that we actually have a captive population. So there are wildcats in captivity who are you know, descended from native wildcats. And so this is, you know, a little ray of hope. And what's happening in it's actually this year was the first year that they've released some captive bred animals who are being released into the Cairngorms, and they're being tracked and, you know, monitored to see how they go. So that's really, really exciting, and we're watching them very carefully to see how that project goes. And you know, obviously there's lots of lessons to be learned there. So, you know, it's, you know, it's very, very sad. And this is a species that, you know, as Pete was saying, it really is on the brink of being lost from this country. And it would be, you know, just such a shame if that was going to be the case. But I think I'm feeling, having sort of been in contact with quite a lot of wild people now and talking to the Scottish team, you know, I'm keeping the faith, and I'm really hoping that they're going to turn things around. So rationale for, you know, an England reintroduction. I mean, basically we could think, oh, well, it's a British, you know, wildcat, that, you know, that's where they should be. And, you know, that's you know, you know, we've still got some left there, so let's work on them, you know, on the species there. But that's a pretty dangerous sort of strategy, especially when you know, we know we've got some really good quality habitat down here. We've had people come and assess it and say that, yeah, it's really good. And they're just, you know, the fact that the last remaining animals are in Scotland doesn't mean that that's the best place for them to be. It's just that that's where persecution haven't wiped them out. So that's, you know, so with background, you know, we know that they're on the brink of being lost from Britain. There's no chance of natural recolonisation to England, especially with the dire situation in Scotland. We know it used to be sort of widespread and common. And you know, we know that, you know, it's a protected species now. So we know that actually persecution should not be an issue going forward. So, you know, there's a very strong case for us looking at reintroducing them to, or, you know, looking at the case for sort of reintroducing them to England.
And that's, you know, what we are doing. So why Devon? It's not just Devon Wildlife Trust has plucked it out the, you know, the ether and said, right, we fancy having some wildcats. It's definitely not that. So there's been some preliminary work already undertaken, and this has looked at habitat across, you know, Britain and Wales, and it's comparing habitat to what there is in France, where we know that there's wildcats, and it's sort of, sort of use a model based on where we know that they've been in France and what the habitats look like, to identify areas in England and Wales, as I say. And then on top of that, putting in some other factors. So, where is the habitat that might be really suitable for feral cats? Because we want to try and, keep any wildcats away from feral cats if possible to start with. And also looking at things like, remoteness and, road networks, because again, we know that a big part of mortality really increase where you've got lots of traffic and roads. So that came up with the Southwest England and, parts of Wales that were suitable or were identified as someone could explore further. And that is where we are. So that sort of gives you a bit of background that it's not just us deciding that we fancy some wildcats. There's, work done by Vincent Wildlife Trust and Durrell to identify these areas to pursue and look closer. So, as well as the Devon project, there's a similar sort of project feasibility work going on in Wales. So, as well as, what we're doing, we're also sort of coordinating with Wales and also, with Scotland as well. So there's a lot of coordination and a lot of trying to talk together, because what we want is not all working in sort of isolation, but have sort of like a national strategy for this species, which, we're all working towards the same aim, and that's getting this species on a much more secure footing and hopefully, saving it into the future. So future generations are going to be able to do what I did 25 years ago and go and see wildcats. So what we're doing is, as I say, so I've been in post for 7 months, and we're doing, it's really important that we're engaging with people. If it was, it'd be easy if it was just all about the cats, but it is, engaging with people, making sure people understand what we're doing. So we're doing a lot of engagement with the public, and this is what, hopefully this is what we're doing today. We're informing people of the project and how brilliant this species is. So, raising the profile of the species. I mean, this is a species that's been lost for over 150 years from our landscape. So actually, there's no historic memory of it, at all. So it's just, again, making sure people understand that this was once, a common species. And as I say, yeah, so linking in with other projects and, just gathering lots of environmental and social data to guide where we're going. So one of the pieces of work that is just about to start is Exeter University are going to be starting some working with stakeholders, what we call stakeholders. So people who, might be impacted by wildcats in Devon. So this could be farmers, it could be, local communities, it could be, foresters, all different people. And as I say, this is all independent. So we have commissioned that work, but it's all independent, and is going to be looking at, how people perceive wildcats, what the issues might be, and then that gives us a really clear understanding of, if there's a problem or if people are really happy about, wildcats. It gives us that real steer of, and we know how to, sort of take the work forward if we have a really good understanding of what people think about this fantastic creature, and that will really help with our work going forward. So one of the things we've talked about, I've mentioned hybridization. this is something that we really need to understand. And what we need to do is there's very little data out there at the moment about, feral cats and how many cats there are out in the rural sort of environment. So we might know that there's lots of domestic cats, but actually sort of ones that maybe don't have owners or are farm cats, maybe we don't have that information. So what we're doing is we're trying to set up a lot of baseline surveys, and we are gathering data on what cats we've got out in sites that we think could be really good for wildcats. So you can see the guys there setting up a camera trap, and they've got what you do. You have your camera trap. You set it up on a path where you can see wildlife is using it. And then for cats, what you do is you put in a lure stick. So put a stick in and you put some valerian on it, and that attracts the cats to it. And then you get coming to your stick. It's really interesting because you get a real feeling for what other animals are in that area. And actually having other predators is quite good because it shows that there's potentially food around. So yeah, and this has all been done, or some of this is being done by volunteers and by students, which is really helpful for us, but also I think they get quite a lot out of it. And we've got hours and hours of camera footage. So if anyone wants to volunteer to go through some footage, that you'd be, we've got plenty of it. So as part of identifying whether we've got feral cats sort of within these landscapes, we can potentially work with sort of cat welfare charities, because we particularly have a similar sort of aim here. They're very interested in the welfare of cats, and having domestic cats out roaming around who are in poor condition or breeding is not good. So in Scotland, they're working very closely with sort of cat welfare charities. I think it's Cats Protection up there, and they are, sort of using the technique that they have developed and identifying if there's cats within an area that they wanting to release wildcats into. And basically, they're sort of filming what cats are there. They then try and work whether it's got an owner. And basically it's by working with the local community, and they've got something called Mog Shot, where they're putting out photos of the different cats that are around, and then people and then they can identify if there's cats that are not got owners, and then what they do is they're trapping them, and they're vaccinated, neutered, and then they're returned, which is seen as a really from a welfare point of view, it means that the animals are going out, and it's something that the public will accept. So, so this is something that we would be looking to put in place if there was a need to try and to try and sort of stop the wildcats coming into contact with domestic cats, because that's really not what we want. But the thing to say about this is that what we know from European sort of populations of wildcat is that you can have happy, healthy wildcat populations in amongst domestic cats. So Scotland is a particular place where the population got under so much stress, and as I said, it was fragmented, low numbers. That's where it came into contact with domestic cats. But we do know that actually, if you can, wildcats want to breed with wildcats. They don't want to breed with domestic cats. But it's so it's just making sure that if we did a reintroduction, we'd put it in an area where we knew that there was a very low chance of them coming into contact with domestic cats. So I'm not saying it's easy, but it's something that we can do, and we can explore, and we can make sure that we're reducing any risk as much as possible. So right, we know that predation is something that a lot of people will be concerned about. This is we are putting out a wildcat, which is a predator, and we know that a lot of our some of our special wildlife is declining. And there's going to be, sort of people who are very concerned about that, and that's fair enough. But what we do know, as I say, but prevention is really complex. It's not a simple thing to try and sort of, right, you put in a wildcat and this happens or that happens. But what we do know is wildcats are going to be preying on things that, species that are widespread, locally common. They're not going to be surviving on things that are rare, because it just doesn't make sense. Basically they're going to be, hunting things that are there and that there's lots of. But this is something that we will explore as the project goes on. It's definitely looking at what the possible impact of wildcats is going to be on other species. But I did a quick look, and obviously from my bird background, I had a look at what's currently on the RSPB's websites, and we know that there's just been the new state of nature report put out, and there is birds, wildlife is still declining, but all the evidence and all the science, and my colleagues in the RSPB, it's all about changes in land management. The fact that our habitats are not in good condition. 70% of the farmland, 70% of our land is farmland, and there's been lots of changes in farming practice, and that has really led to population sort of being sort of struggling. I haven't got the information for small mammals because I couldn't find it, but a lot of this work is if we're doing work for wildcats, we would be promoting really good habitat and encouraging people to improve the habitat, which hopefully is going to mean that it's much better, it's going to improve the sort of habitat for other species. So we can use our wildcats as a sort of flagship. So one of the things, as I say, is we want to make sure that we're really investigating what impact putting wildcats will have on other species and other sort of European protected species or populations. So that is the piece of work that we will be doing. And but again, from using the experiences in Europe, we know, so for example, this is dormice, so we know that dormice can be part of a wildcat's diet, but it's a very small part, and that's only going to be in areas where there's lots and lots of dormice. Again, if you're a wildcat, you're not going to spend a lot of time looking for dormice. It's just not going to be worth your while. But that is something that's definitely part of what we do. Any sort of good reintroduction project is going to look at the impact on other species. Also of real importance to us is the welfare of our, the captive population. So at the moment, there's wildcats in captivity, and there's a stud book which is managed by the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, that up in the Highlands, so we know that there's a healthy population, sort of about 150 animals in captivity, and they're managed very, very carefully, and this, with the stud book, and just checking, with the genetics, and making sure that there's, the breeding pairs are going to, ensure that there's a good genetic diversity out there. And what we want to do is make sure that, if we're breeding animals, we know that the first 5 months of their lives is really important. It's when they learn everything, and so if we're wanting to release really good cats that are able to survive in the wild, that first 5 months is so important and critical. And so we have to make sure that we're giving them really good environment to become, animals that can hunt and look after themselves in the wild. So this is the volunteer team who went out and helped to create some sort of structural diversity within the pens, to make sure that they did lots of climbing and going high up on platforms, and that we know that makes a massive difference. So welfare is of real importance to us, and we've actually got a PhD student who's working with the project, who is actually looking at the welfare side of things, And that's quite important to us, because we want happy, healthy animals. So one of the other things that we're doing a lot of, I think I've sort of mentioned, is that we've discovered that there's a real scientific network of people who are really interested and passionate about wildcats. And we have, joined this group, and we are, there's lots of information. So it's on, part of the Euro Mammals network. And so there's as I say, a group of people who are, dedicated to wildcats and doing all sorts of research. And this is all across Europe. And it's really exciting. And one of the great things is that they're very, very, willing to share their knowledge and information. So we can learn a lot from them, from, the experiences they have with, wildcats, and sort of in, within Europe. And that's a really, really valuable resource for us. So what are we looking for at the perfect release site? I mean, basically, it is all about making sure that we've got really, really good habitat, but also of, critical importance is making sure that it's an area where, there's a low risk of, cat or, wildcat human conflict. And also we don't want it in an area where we know that there's lots of feral cats. So we would, that's why making sure that we're doing our surveys and, identifying, what the sort of baseline is for, feral cats. We also need to know what's whether there's good sort of prey availability. So we're, doing all sorts of prey availability surveys. So, and all through this, we are making sure that, any reintroduction that you do, you have to make sure it's is under the sort of IUCN and our local sort of, conservation guidelines for doing this. But, we know that reintroductions are challenging, but we know that there's some really good examples there, and it's making sure that we're, making sure that we're ticking all the boxes, really, which are important boxes. But again, just going back to sort of like, sharing what other people have done in Europe, where, so where they've been lost in certain areas and they've recolonized. And what we're seeing is that they're really using wildcat as a species for, sort of really getting people engaged with the sort of environment. And so in Germany, they've got this wildcat village, and there, there's lots of educational stuff going on there with children, but also, adults, and, they've got some animals there on display, and it's just really sort of telling the story of this fantastic creature. So I've been really inspired with what's happening elsewhere. Also, another really interesting example is they've actually just recently recolonized the Netherlands, which, when you think about it, is probably one of the most, populated and sort of man-influenced areas. So again, it's really interesting to see how they're working and what they're doing. And we know from, on the back of wildcats, that it's really inspired and driven really fantastic habitat restoration work. So creating, linking up areas of forest and creating good corridors. Yeah, lots of really exciting projects that we can, look to. So I just wanted to, finish up by just saying, I mean, I think you've got a little bit more understanding of wildcats, and I'm sure you've got loads and loads more questions. And, it's really difficult to try and get across all the things that, we're working on, because it's, it's quite a complex project. But, if we get these wildcats out there, and I do hope that we do, it's not going to be a species that we're going to see every day. And, they're really, really hard to see. They live at extremely low densities. They're really secretive. But I just think, even if you don't ever see them, knowing that this species is out there would be just fantastic and so exciting. So that's me rattling through this project. So thank you so much for listening. And I hope that you managed to hear me and that the sound quality wasn't too horrendous. But it's been really lovely to share this project with you, and I hope that you'll continue to be interested, and as the project develops, that you might like to, hear more about it. And if anyone wants to contact us and got more questions or would like to volunteer, the email is up there. Thank you.
We've had quite a few questions come in. I mean, one just starts off with what sort of, it may have been picked up in the presentation whilst we were juggling around trying to deal with sound quality, and do apologise for that. But just in terms of density that they would live in, what sort of area is a typical range for wildcats?
So what you tend to do, how the sort of the ranges are set up is you'll tend to have, perhaps two or three females, and then you'll have a male that will, be, sort of overlapping all those territories, and you're only going to get between 3 to 5 cats per 10 kilometre square, if that makes sense. And again, when I looked into it a bit more, you think of an average size of a farm in Devon, you're only going to get 3 cats. No, 1 cat per over 3 farms. So that just shows the sort of really low density that these animals live at. So as I say, it's really taking yourself away from thinking about them being really concentrated and in big colonies. That does not happen with a wildcat.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And when it's probably worth my reflections. I think some people know what the town that I live in, but I live in Bovey Tracy on the edge of Dartmoor, and there's probably about 5,000 residents, give or take, in Bovey. And within that, let's say a conservative estimate, there might be 700 domestic cats. If there were wildcats, the area of Bovey Tracy would be the home range of a single animal. So it just puts it into perspective in terms of the size of area these animals occupy, the space and range that they go over. And I think sometimes the parallels that we draw with domestic cats and the potential risks or impacts, well, that they are occupying very large spaces, and as Kath really well points out, that they're not going to expend a lot of energy trying to find rare, unusual things. If they come across them, they will predate them. But otherwise, it's rabbits, voles, other mammals which are common and widespread. So it's really important to note. I'm seeing some questions coming through. So what I'll do is I'll ask Kath a question, and then I'll scroll through the questions which have come in, and be able to answer those in just a moment. One really good question is, could they potentially be drawn into predating rats, and would that draw them into potentially close to human inhabitation?
It's really interesting, that one, because I have looked into sort of where I mean they will eat. I'm sure if there's rats, they'll eat them. But I think they probably have to be quite hungry to be pulled into sort of habitation. But it's probably a bit of an unknown one, actually. It's talking to various experts and people. I mean, rats just don't come up as something that they're really preying on a lot. So I don't, I don't think that will be, an issue. And the thing is, if we're putting out wildcats, we're going to have to be absolutely 100% sure that, it's in areas with good prey availability, so that they're not put in that position that they haven't got enough prey, that they're going to start looking, fighting for rats with the domestic cats. That's just not what you want. And, going back to the prey, is we don't want to just, we know that rabbits are really, really great. If there's rabbits around for them, they'll eat rabbits. But we need a variety of prey, because we know the prey, like the village where I live, there was lots of rabbits about 5 years ago, and they've all got, had all been having diseases, and now there's hardly any. So we want somewhere where there's like a range of different species, so that there's always plenty of prey. We don't, there's also the thought, well, would they eat grey squirrels? I would think they probably would eat grey squirrels if you've got them bouncing around. But one of the things I didn't say is that they're usually very, very nocturnal. But again, that'll all be down to, if you've got a female with kits, she would probably will be, if she's really needing to hunt, she will be out during the day as well. So that's where the squirrels will need to watch out.
You really well preempted my next question, which was about potentially helping with the balance of invasive and non-native species in principally grey squirrel. And yeah, they could have a role there. There certainly would not be a silver bullet, but because grey squirrels have so few predators, really, that wildcats could potentially have a role there, but much more so pine martens, goshawk, and other things, which would be our natural friends there.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, we just don't have that evidence. We don't know what, there isn't that, there's not loads of grey squirrels in Europe for us to know that that's going to be the situation. So, yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, we'll move on because I want to get through as many questions as we possibly can, because they're all very diverse and excellent, and we'll get through as many as possible. So someone's asked, you mentioned that there's approximately 150 in captivity. Is there a genetic difference between the European wildcats that you've talked about, for example, those in the Netherlands, compared to our Scottish and wildcats which are found here in Great Britain? Could EU wildcats help boost, in terms of the genetics, the UK population?
That's a really, really good question. So originally, at one time, the Scottish wildcat was thought that it was a subspecies, but that's all changed, and so they're all considered to be wildcats are wildcats. Oh right, okay. I'm just reading a question, right, which somebody's just sent, and whether they will prey on ground nesting birds, which again is a really, really good question. All the evidence is that's not what they will do. I mean, basically, how cats hunt is, and how the wildcats will be hunting is that by sound. So they spend an inordinate amount of time just sitting and waiting and listening. So they're not really going to be sort of searching out for nests on open ground. That's not to say that if they bumble across it, they wouldn't take some nestlings. They're not going to say no, but it's not something that is actually going to be sort of purposely going out and looking for ground nesting birds. It's just not really how they work. So hopefully that answered that question. Right, I'm going to look in the chat and see. Oh, why is it not opening? Oh, Pete's back! Hooray!
Gosh, we've got all the gremlins. Well done for coping with that. I'm very sorry, everyone. We've Zoom crashed. I've only had this situation once before, and now most of our the chat, which was included, I'm just trying to bring back up. But what we'll do is just try. If Kath's got the questions there, then she can ask them, and I can help answer some of them to take some of the pressure off.
Okay, so I have a question about dormice and whether they would be finding, dormice when they're sort of, on the ground, nesting on the ground or hibernating. It really isn't something that comes up. And I know from when talking to people about dormice and looking for dormice, is they're really, really, difficult. Yeah, they're difficult to find, and even sniffer dogs can't find the hibernating animals. I just don't, it's not going to be something that wildcat's going to be doing. They, as I say, they're very much listening for things.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. They're sight and sound hunters, so that movement and the sound, that's what they're tuned into. So something that is still hibernating or out of the way, that isn't going to spark their their interest.
I suppose it depends on how loudly they're snoring. But I don't.
Very good. So the question just come through is, what's the life expectancy of a wildcat and the usual size of a litter?
Really good question. So they have been known to apparently to live up to 20 years. But that's not going to be usual. But yeah, they're going to be up to sort of 10, 12 years. But getting to, so it's a bit like a lot of species, that if they can get beyond one, then their likelihood of survival is going to increase. But a lot of them die, obviously after, when they've left their mother. And in that first year, so it's a really, difficult time for them. And it's a bit like, as I said, sort of more roads can be really challenging for them, but they can learn about roads, but they've obviously got to get through that critical moment and and learn in a safe way about roads.
So there's a question that's come in regarding is specifically around disease risk. Yeah, are they susceptible to some of the diseases that domestic cats can suffer from? I mean, there's a sort of higher level answer to that question in terms of whenever any species reintroduction is considered, we go through a very thorough disease risk assessment, and that's partly in terms of the welfare of the animals, in terms of the diseases they may be able to catch from the environment that they're put within, but also the risk of them actually then passing particular diseases on or being a vector. So all of those are covered really. That will be covered in great detail. And one aspect of that is really about the ensuring the welfare and good sort of husbandry, I suppose, of domestic cats and through the feral cat populations as well.
Yeah, I didn't answer about litter size, so I'll just go back to that one. So
Yep.
so basically they can be anything from 1 to 5, but it's quite difficult. And actually trying to get that data, in the wild is that it's actually quite limited, because finding them, at that age is, when they've just had to, is really difficult. But there is meant to be a range of about 1 to 5.
I've got some.
Yeah, and with the diseases, so yeah, they have the whole gambit of the different cat diseases, and that's again going back to we would have to be, if we're putting animals out, we have to be responsible, and they would probably be vaccinated before we put them out. And it's again working with domestic cat owners to really promoting responsible cat ownership. And again, that's working with sort of cat welfare organisations on the feral populations as well, because we don't we would be looking to vaccinate anything that would go back into the wild. So yeah, it's a really important point.
Okay, so just we'll go for 2 last questions. Did we properly answer before Zoom decided to cause us heart attacks? The issue around genetics and whether the European population can enhance the UK potential. Maybe just go over that again, because the question has risen again, so I think it would be useful.
Yeah. So basically the genetics of wildcat, European wildcat, they're pretty much, they're all one species. I think the Caucasus population is different. So, but all the rest, so Spanish, German, potentially are the same as the Scottish. It's not so actually, and our Scottish population and including the captive population has potentially got a bit of hybridization in there, so at an acceptable level. So actually, bringing in some European blood would be really fantastic, but it's really difficult to do. And I don't want to mention the B word, Brexit, but that's not helped.
Yeah. So what you're saying is within the stud book, that population's managed really well. They aren't, they're pure in terms of the level of hybridization. That's a really good base to build a population from. And long term, we would really want to draw in some that genetic diversity from further afield.
Yeah. Exactly. And from talking to, you know, experts in the field, I'm definitely not a geneticist, so I haven't got a clue. But you know, that people are happy with the genetics, but it would actually make it better, and you know, you get that sort of bit more vigor, and you know, because it's not surprising, you know, the Scottish population or our British population were probably going through a bit of a bottleneck anyway. So yeah, this would sort of bring it out if we had some European blood, from what I
Okay.
can understand.
Yeah, so something that we'll certainly be exploring further. So last question, what eats a wildcat?
Eagles.
I've summarized that very good. Yeah, so what are their natural predators, and are there any that we have in the UK?
You know, the main problem for wildcats is going to be us, you know, and sort of human inflicted, you know, either persecution or, you know, as I say, road mortality and things like that. Road mortality is going to be a big thing. But yeah, if we were in Europe, you know, a lynx would definitely, you know, take wildcats. You know, eagles will take them. You know, yeah, so they do have some predators, but yeah,
Yeah,
we probably
and
haven't got much.
and it's similar with some of our other species like beavers. There's stages in their life when they're more vulnerable, and if you've got
Obviously, yeah.
kittens and youngsters, then you know, badgers, foxes, and other things may be able to take them. But yeah,
Yeah.
limited range of predators that we have in this country that would
Mm.
predate on them. So
You know, if you had a fight between a badger and a wildcat, the badger's probably going to win. But you know, a lot with all these predators, they just avoid each other, and you know, it's not in their interest to get into fights.
yeah. So I'll just draw things to a close. Thank you, Kath. That was excellent, and thank you everyone for hanging on and bearing with us whilst we had a few technical hitches along the way. It's certainly something we're going to have to resolve in future, because there's nothing more irritating than sound quality when you're desperately trying to listen into some of the key facts. We will be having future meetings of this nature, more Zoom meetings, to update you as we get towards the end of the feasibility phase, being able to share some of the key information and data that Kath and the partnership will be gathering together, and we'll keep all of our members and others fully informed.
Yeah, I just realised that I meant to say, so the feasibility is going to be, we're going to report by the end of next year, aren't we? So just,
Yep.
yeah, that's the timescale for it. So hopefully we'll have, you know, we'll have pulled all that information together.
Yep. Okay. So thanks very much, everyone. Watch this space. Obviously, through all the various DWT communications channels, we'll be able to update you on the progress of the feasibility phase, and yeah, the exciting prospect of wildcats potentially coming back. So thank you all very much. Thanks, Kath. Yeah, well
Thank
done for
you.
persevering. Thank you.